Hi, I'm Jeff from Home Renovision DIY, and today we are talking about finishing trim work. Now, we are going to be doing this whole series on DIY finished carpentry because here on this channel we've done a lot of different things. We've shown you how to paint, how to drywall, how to do flooring, just about everything. But when it comes to the finished carpentry, we realize that we've come a little bit short on giving you a broad scope of knowledge so that you can do all your finished carpentry and have it look perfect every time. I'm going to share with you a great DIY homeowner secret, a nice process so that you can get a great finish and you're not going to go doing a lot of rework and touch-ups and making messes as you go. So today is going to be a process. We're going to be doing baseboards, we're going to be doing door and window casings. So let's get right into this. We're going to talk about the product first. You have basically two choices when you're going to be buying trim for your house, and that is the medium density fiber, or you can get solid wood. Now, medium density fiber used to have a benefit because it was cheaper, but now it seems to be running about the same kind of cost. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that if you're going to buy trim, go get wood. And if you want a shopping secret, don't buy it at the box store. Their markup is ridiculous. Go online and find a local trim supplier in the area. You can just Google trim carpentry supplier. In Ottawa, we have a company that's just across the street. I first found them because they opened up literally across the street from a Home Depot. And I saw the truck from Alexandria Moldings. I saw that truck roll into Home Depot one day and I went shopping. And then after I saw it roll across the street to this other store, I had no idea who they were, so I popped in to say hi. Turns out they sell their trim to anybody, and you didn't have to be a part of their exclusive club. It was also half the price, right? That's crazy. So I started buying really high quality 3/4 inch trim, right? That was cheaper than the economy trim at the Home Depot. Just saying. Shouldn't be a big surprise. For Home Depot to be handling trim, it's real labor expensive. I mean, like, they put it on this huge skid, they have to roll this cart through, and they got guys standing there loading a few pieces of every kind of trim. It's ridiculous. When you go to this store, they bring it, the truck drops it, and they just roll it right into the bay. It's more of a warehouse effect, where Home Depot is more of a retail look. I know they're supposed to act like a warehouse, but they don't operate like a warehouse, and it makes it very, very expensive. So find yourself a good deal on your trim, buy the highest quality that you can find, because one of the measures when people are looking at your house, if you're going to sell, is the trim work, all right? If you have the same cheap economy trim as everyone else, it always looks flat and boring, and it doesn't give you the options for making that pop on the wall. When you use something like this as a baseboard and it's 3/4 inch thick, that means the casings are also 3/4 inch thick. There's like a 3D look, right? It pops off the wall and you get nice shadowing effect. Anyway, worth the investment. So let's talk about what my program is. So there are different processes for installing and finishing off your trim, depending on what kind of situation you're in. If you're in an existing space and you want to change out old baseboards and casings and put new ones in, then I'm going to suggest that you follow this process. If you're in a new home construction environment where you're doing a brand new remodel and you have access to a paint sprayer, then I'm going to suggest you just install all the trim and then tape off your windows and use the paint sprayer to spray all your trim in place. Then you can cut and roll all your walls. But what I'm doing is I'm going to follow a simple program for people who don't have those high quality tools, okay? Because this is very helpful. What we're going to do is actually paint all of our trim in advance, and then I'm going to show you how to install it so that there's very minimal touch-up work after the fact. Because if you can paint all your trim first and then put it in place, you're going to save yourself a lot of crawling around and bending over, and it just makes the whole process a lot easier to deal with. So if I paint it first, I can put it in place, do some caulking, I'm going to have a few nail holes to touch up, then it's just really quick and done, nice and easy. So I have got a nice baseboard. It's I think they call it the Hopper series. I don't know if it's available where you are, but it's very cool. We also have some really thick casing. Now this is a 3/4 inch profile as well, and it is really wide. It's 3 3/4 inch, and I'm going to use this around my windows on a tile wall to give it a real dramatic flair. Also got some nice 1x5 flat stock. This is very cool. It comes with a little bit of a rounded edge here, so this makes a really nice detail when you are running your casing up against it. And we're going to combine that for our window jambs, and then we're going to add this as a window sill. Bam. All right. So we're gonna stick all that together to make our windows. And this will give us a nice little build out and extend our window jamb into more of a ledge so that it functions. You can put your herb pots and stuff like that in the window in the kitchen. And then around our doors, we're doing the same 3/4, but it's only 2.5. Same series. And this is because we don't want to have all of the doors with that huge trim. It takes away from the effect in the window, and it also makes it more convenient because we're going to have light switches around the room. So door jambs on the interior that are too wide, you really need to plan in advance to move your light switches over. And we didn't do that. We went more of a standard install. So this is for that. What we're going to do is I'm just going to pull out my roller, and I'm just using my mini roller today. Yep. I'm going to use the mini roller. We're going to roll the trim, set it aside to dry. Once you roll the trim, it usually is about 20 to 30 minutes, and then it's ready to start cutting and installing. So we're just going to take a few minutes and get all this process done. I'm going to wear some gloves. There's not really a whole lot to this, except because of the detail, I'm going to roll it on a little thick, and then I'm going to drag my brush through it to make sure we don't have drips laying in all the edges. That'll keep the details sharp, and then that's it. One of the downfalls of buying a gallon of trim paint is if it sits around for a few weeks, it separates. And I don't have a personal paint shaker sitting around at home, so this is basically all I can do. Ay, ay, ay. I just hate sitting there with a stir stick making a mess of everything. There we go. Done. Okay. Oh. I'm going to try to not get covered in paint today and use a couple of gloves. Learn from experience that when you're painting the trim, although you're only painting the top surface, you always get a little drip line around the edge because the profile is so sharp. And then when you pick it up to set it aside to dry, it always gets all over your hands. And I am just loving the idea of keeping my hands clean. So instead of painting one board at a time, I'm just going to paint a whole section at a time. Once this roller fills up with paint a little better, it'll work a lot nicer. Now, I'm more concerned about these thick sections. This joint here, this is the part of the trim that actually sits up against the flooring. That's the one that I don't want to ever have touch paint again. All right? So that's the one that I want to put a nice thick coat on, because I'm only ever planning on putting one coat of paint there. The top part of the trim, I'm not too concerned about how perfect that detail is, because that's where I'm going to be putting in some nails, and that's also going to be where the caulking goes, and I'm going to need to run the brush again on that later to get a really nice cut line. So just making sure that that thick section of the trim is done gives me an advantage. Just run that through the detail so we don't get drips. Now this is not as fast as spraying the trim once it's in place, but it's a lot faster than just putting it on the wall and then crawling around brushing afterwards. And because we're getting a nice look right against that edge that goes on the floor, I'm never going to have to run my brush right up along that edge and try to cut it afterwards. And that will save me from having a lot of ugly mistakes later. All right, so while our trim is drying, we need a few more minutes before it's good. We set up the bench to show you all the tools and stuff that we're going to be using in our carpentry video today, and possibly what you might need to be shopping for yourself, and we're going to go through how they all function so that when we're doing the application later on the wall, it makes a lot more sense for you. Okay, so first of all, unless you literally want to install all your trim with a hammer and nails, which is an option, you're going to need to buy one of these bad boys. Now, this Husky compressor, it's a pretty basic unit. I use it for trim carpentry. You can also use it for hardwood flooring, but not for large spaces. It doesn't hold enough pressure and power to do a hardwood floor job start to finish without you constantly waiting for it to pressurize again. But for finish nailing, it is brilliant. It's on wheels and the front has rubber feet. So this is designed to be used inside a finished house for doing repairs and not going to mark any floors or cause any scratches. That's an important consideration. I'm using a 2-inch brad nail system. I'm using an 18 gauge nailer for our trim. You could use a 16 gauge for some of this application because the wood is so thick, but I found the versatility in an 18 gauge. If I'm going to recommend to homeowners, get one tool, get one 18 gauge nailer. You can get nails that are 1 inch to 2 inches long, different variations. That's best for you. A 2-inch nail works really good for a 3/4 inch wood, plus the thickness of your drywall. It still leaves you enough nail to get through the drywall and occasionally find some wood. It's really effective when you're pinning things together. So I can connect my joints using these nails and then I'm set to go. You're also going to need some glue because all of your outside corners and miter joints should be glued. It should be #1 rule at doing finished carpentry. Glue your joints, okay? If you're not gluing your joints, you're guaranteeing that those joints are going to crack. And cracked joints always look like garbage and means callbacks and more work in the future. So avoid that and use the glue. Depending on your compressor and the tool that you buy, you might need oil, okay? And the way that that works is you can just put it in the back of the gun. This particular gun that I have here from DeWalt doesn't require oil, but let me just show you. There's my gun there, okay? If this required oil, it'll say so in the package, and you just flip the nozzle up and you can throw a couple of drips in there. Do that every 30 minutes to an hour to avoid your gun jamming on you. But like I said, I paid a little extra for a gun that I don't need to do that for. Oh, now that we're here, we'll just talk about the gun. So this gun is awesome. It has depth setting dial on it, okay? So if the nails in the gun are sticking out in whatever wood you're working with, you can adjust that. If you're going to a softwood from a hardwood, you can back it out so that you're not driving the nail too deep. It also has a nice little waist clip here so it can sit on the belt. And any other considerations here? Oh yeah, the little yellow rubber tip on the end there. That's awesome because you have to compress the nailer in order to fire it. All right, and that little rubber tip down there keeps you from marking the wood when you're putting your pressure on. Other than that, here, let me get rid of that case. The functionality is simple. It has a release, all right, and your nails can just be loaded in off the side. Knowing how to function that is really handy. The compressor hose that ties all this together, I always go out and I buy one of these 25-foot rubber ones because they don't kink, okay? And they always come back to normal. You're gonna find that if you buy a cheaper plastic hose, it'll just be a mess and you spend your whole day trying to undo the kinks in the hose. You just pull down this click lock system, okay? You're good to go. When you're all done, you can just pull down and release the tool. And of course, if you're gonna be using air tools, I know, but this is one time it's important. The brad nail is a very unique tool because it's firing a nail under an incredible amount of velocity, and sometimes when it hits an object, or if you accidentally fire, it'll deflect. And so it's good to have these on. They don't do a lot of damage if you're not really close to it. Like I can stand here and shoot Max with the gun all day long and he's gonna get a few pinpricks, but that'll be about it. But it's good to wear the glasses. This tool here, I'm gonna demonstrate later because we have an existing door that we pulled the trim off to start the renovation, and there are brad nails left in the jamb. And so this is a great tool. I use this to pinch my heads and then I rock to pull the nails out. You'll see that demonstrated later. That's worth gold. Good to have a drill. Construction screws. We're gonna be building our own windowsill because the depth is so thick. I couldn't just buy a stock windowsill. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna glue the sill to the jamb, and then we're gonna add construction screws. So always good to have that handy. Gives you lots of options. Now, once we've got all the trim on the wall, we have to patch our holes. And so, Hawk 4-inch knife, and you guessed it, I love my sheetrock 45. This is a perfect application for this. You can mix that pretty silky smooth, and then you can just use your thumb and press it into all the holes, because a good carpenter will always fill their own nail holes. All right? If you're on a job somewhere and the carpenter installed all of his trim and he didn't finish his nails, he did not finish his job. Shout out to all the guys who are cutting corners out there. If you're gonna nail something on the wall and you're not gonna finish your hole, you don't deserve to get paid. Go fill your holes. It's not the painter's job to clean up after your mess. Now, you're gonna get some hate for that one, but that's all right. The other thing you're gonna need is some caulking so that you can do all your joints from your one surface to the wall and even your inside joints. Nice to clean it up with a little bit of finished caulking. This particular product is necessary. Okay, this product is called Windows and Doors, okay? Don't use the general purpose caulking. Now, here's the deal about caulking, and I'm gonna get into this a little bit because the quality of your finish depends on the quality of the products you're using. If you use the general purpose caulking, yes, it dries quick, it's like 20 minutes. But it does not have any elastomeric property whatsoever. And during any expansion contraction cycle, it's gonna crack. All right, so don't use that junk. Use this. Yes, it takes about 2 hours to actually set up properly before you paint, but it's worth the investment. And if you're doing any kind of trim work, trust me, you've got the time to let this dry. Put your stuff on the wall, do the caulking first before you fill your nail holes. And by the time you're done filling your nail holes with your sheetrock 45, you'll be able to sand all of your nail holes because it'll be dry really quick. And then by the time you're all done that, this will be ready for you to paint, okay? So don't get your knickers in a knot. Feel free to use a quality product, even if it takes longer to dry. And if you're in a real big hurry, you can buy a quick dry product that is elastomeric. It's a little more expensive and it's difficult to work with, but it's an option. Latex acrylic caulking, you just snip the tip and then you're good to go. You don't have to puncture a hole. So don't waste your time, and you can make this really tiny. So when you're doing finishing work, if the wood is nice and tight to your wall, you don't need a lot of bead, okay? Because the expansion rate is like 200 to 300%. So you can actually get away with a real thin bead. It doesn't have to be obnoxious, all right? So cut your hole small, and then when you're done, you can put tape on it and it'll be ready to use the next time. Because you're using 45-minute mud, you're gonna need a little sanding sponge so you can take off your rough edges. And of course, I know it's not part of finished carpentry as far as a trade is concerned, but since I'm talking to you, the homeowner, you guys are gonna wanna know how to finish the entire project. Here's my tips here. Have a little kills, all right? When you're going through your wood and you're ready to paint it, if you see any of that finger joint section of the primed wood that's a little yellow, hit it with the oil-based primer first, set it aside until it's dry before you paint it, all right? Always good to have a couple of rags, because if you're dirty, then everything you touch is gonna get dirty. Just good to have that going on. Get a nice 3-inch brush. A stiff brush is best. No, that's not a joke. A stiff brush for trim work is better than the regular purpose one used for wall. But if you are good enough to get away with it, one brush does everything. It's generally recommended to use a stiff bristle brush for doing trim, because most paint will, when you paint it, will drag on the trim and leave lines. But if you're using a good quality acrylic paint, okay, then you want to paint from the top down, always dragging in the direction of gravity, and you'll be fine. If you're using oil, start from the bottom and paint up. That's the simple rule, and that'll help you out. Because your trim paint is going to come in either a small quart, and you can't get a brush in it, or it's going to come in a gallon. It's too much paint to work with. Having a handy pail now makes perfect sense, because you can add just a little bit of paint, and you can put your brush on that magnet, and it'll keep it out of the paint so it's not soaking up into the bristles while you're working. Okay, the only other thing I think I wanted to mention was the option, some nitrile gloves, right? When you're working with all your finished trim, wear the gloves. Usually when you're in a finished trim, if you're renovating your own house, you could be in a finished space. If you're gonna get paint all over yourself, get it on the gloves. You can take the gloves off when you're done, and you're not gonna make a mess somewhere by accident. Finally, my laser level. I know, I'm gonna mention this one more time. We're gonna be building window jambs. Now our windows are in level, but in order to put the jambs in, we're gonna build it all first and then set it in place. I like to just throw this up to have a laser line where I want it finished so that I have a reference point. So when I'm nailing and shimming, it makes my life simple. I don't have to constantly be grabbing levels and checking out all the surfaces for plumb and flush. Drop one laser line on the side of the window where the jamb goes, and you can get that installed real easy. You're gonna see all of this in the video. Now let's get into installing this stuff, because now the trim is dry, we're good to go. All right, so if you're a homeowner and you're looking for tool investment, understand that setting up your finished carpentry can be expensive, but it doesn't have to be. The compressor nailer that I use, you can usually get in a combination for around $200. This saw right here, I think it also is about $200 to $250. That's in Canadian dollars, so I know you can get a better deal. This is just a basic 10-inch compound miter saw. It does not have a slide, it's not a 12-inch blade. Everything I cut, I've got to loosen up my wheel and tilt over and cut my miters on that angle. The beautiful thing about this is it's set at 45 degrees as a default, so it makes my life simple when I want to cut trim. Now, because my baseboards are so tall, I've got to lay them flat and cut my miters on the side. We'll show you how to do that in a minute. The only other thing you need to know about this is it has a release mechanism underneath here so that I can move my table, and I have my gauges for my angles here. For today's video, we are going to oversimplify everything and only cut 45-degree angles. That means when you add two 45s together, it makes 90 degrees. So that's all of your miter cuts around the doors. It's also all of the inside and outside corners on every wall. If the walls are not perfect 90s, as a homeowner doing finishing trim, I'm going to show you secrets and tips that you can use to keep your saw skills to a minimum, and then you do the install, it's still going to look perfect, okay? So bear with me. Let's get into this. First thing we got to do is start measuring. So I've got my tape measure and my pencil. Pretty. I'm going to be handing these out. We're going to be going on our tour in just a few weeks, so make sure you check out our webpage, look at the event schedule, all right? Check out to see when we're going to be in an area near you, and click on an event that you want to get to and fill all that information out. We look forward to seeing you live in your city soon. So my process for doing finished trim in a room is first you want to do all your door casing, then you want to do your baseboards, and then window casing. The windows you can do in any order, but you can't put your baseboards in until your door casings are on. That's kind of a given. So, like I mentioned before, this is a previous door, and I had a casing installed that using the 2-inch nails that we're going to be using. I'll just throw that over there. And these pliers are amazing because you can remove the nail without just pinching off the head. Moderate amount of pressure just to hold it snug, and it'll release. And you can just roll it off. Now the design on this pair of pliers here for nail removal is that even up against softwood lumber, if you make a mistake, you don't have your air pressure set right, and your nail doesn't drive all the way in, you can sit this on your soft pine, pull your nails with that rocking motion, okay? And it's not going to dent the wood. So this is why I love having these in my toolbox. They are a lifesaver whenever you make a mistake, and you will. We all do. That's normal. All right. There's a delicate balance there between cutting it and pulling it, let me tell you. Whoops. Balance not achieved. Okay, so I'm going to teach you my basic system for installing a door casing, and that is this. Set your window trim in behind the hinge, and you want to be consistent. And the idea here is you put your pencil there and mark your trim. All right? You can see that, okay? There's your mark. And then on the face of this, draw a line somewhat of a 45-degree to that intersection point. And make that real obvious. That's all the information you need to go to the saw to cut. But in this situation, we're dealing with new construction. We don't have flooring yet. So you have two choices. You can set it on the subfloor, and then later you can take out a jam saw and cut the trims down. Or if you follow my advice and you have everything on site because you've done your shopping already, you bring out the underpad and the flooring that you're going to be using, and you lay it in place. And you can set height of the finished floor in front of your door. Bam. Now you can put your casing right on that flooring. What this will do is provide you the perfect gap for later when you go to install your floor. You can slide it right underneath. Now when we're installing the floor in this room, I'm actually starting on this door and heading in that direction. So I don't have any concerns about doing this right now. It's a great little cheat, but look how much my cut line has changed. It's almost 3/8 of an inch difference, okay? That's awesome. And now I've also saved myself about 5 or 10 minutes per casing of fussing around with that little jam saw. Now, the other side, we're gonna set that up as well. There's my line. I'm gonna just trace that out on the trim, put my mark, boom. Now I'm good to go with the saw. We're gonna get those cut. All right, so just a quick note, if you have any questions or comments about the tool selection we're using, make sure you put it in the comment section. I do check these comments every morning and every night. I may not have a chance to respond to all of them, but I will read them all. And if you are a member, I guarantee to respond to your questions, so feel free to ask as many as you like. Now, let's go take a look at this. Here's our trim. Now the saw, of course, we're just gonna set 45 degrees. Now you see these notches, right? These notches are predetermined places where the saw will set up. So there's one set at 45, and so you can be confident when you get there that it's the right angle. Now, before you get started, you want to get familiar with your saw. You want to take a look at the material that you're cutting out and where the blade is. So the blade is actually going to finish here about 1/8 of an inch from the yellow side. So when I slide this over here, I'm going to put my pencil line right on that mark. And then I'm going to cut twice. Measure once and cut twice. I know it's contrary to what most people do, but watch what I do here. You see, I just started my line, and now I know where that blade's gonna go. I can slide this into position. Perfect every time. Now for the other side of the casing, and you know what, just for the heck of it, if you find that it makes it easier for you so that you're not confused, when you're making your mark, put a whole line on that, okay? You can draw the whole relative angle, just so you know which way your saw blade needs to be set. You don't ever get confused. Nothing worse than cutting something the wrong angle and then it's garbage because it's too short. So we're gonna do a primary line. And you can do this over and over and over again as many times as necessary. And I use my thumb against the edge here, and I can actually feed the trim without moving my arm. So I'm never in any risk of cutting myself. And you can see there's my cut right on that pencil marker. Perfect. I was just taking a couple shots at Max here. That's funny. I was just reminding Max of a story when I was working on a job. We had a guy who did deliveries for us. His name was Bob. And every time Bob would show up, the guys would all turn around with our guns and take the safety off. We'd pull the trigger back. And then when Bob would come up, we'd all turn around and unload brad nails on him. It's not the most responsible thing to do, but man, was it ever fun. You'd see them, we'd be 20, 30 feet away, and the nails would all come firing out. They all turned sideways, and they finished the rest of the trip sideways. It was the weirdest thing. Every once in a while, we'd poke a little hole in him, but he was wearing glasses. Anyway, the next step in putting in your trim, don't put tight up against your hinges. That's a mistake a lot of people make. There's one stationary and one moving element of the hinge. So if you're tight up against the hinge, you're gonna get squeaks. Take it a 1/16 of an inch off. Just make sure there's no contact there, all right? And then about there, throw that into the jamb. Now it's installed. Come down to the next one. Now wood is tricky because sometimes it can be curved, right? So you wanna make sure you're on the hinge and then let it off a little bit. Fire that nail into the jamb behind it. Remember, the jamb material itself is 5/8 of an inch thick, okay? So it's thicker than this, right? The idea here is you're attaching this piece of wood to the door jamb, not the wall or the wall framing at this point. Okay, we get down here, same thing, push and then pull it off a little bit. Now, the reason I'm always setting this pin above the hinge is I don't want this nail to hit one of the screws that the hinge is using. If it does that, it won't go all the way in, and then you're gonna have an ugly spot there trying to repair next to a hinge and you won't have access to it. So always shoot just a little bit above. 3 nails is all you need. Now you can check your gaps here. My wall is sort of straight, but that's fine. Leave it alone for now, because one side fixed. Now we come over here, and we're going to set this on our mark that we wanted for that, right? Remember I put a pencil line there? I'm gonna shoot about 1.5 feet away, and I'm only throwing in 2 nails this time. And here's why. When I'm cutting my top, I'm gonna be cutting the length from the 2 miters, and I want this to have a little flexibility to move left or right to close the gaps and make it perfect, okay? So if you set your nails a little bit lower, you'll have a little bit of flexibility. We're talking a 1/16 of an inch, but that little bit of flexibility makes the joint perfect. So now what we do is we're gonna measure from the outside to the outside, okay? And in this case, it's 37 1/4. That's perfect. So let's go back to the saw and I'll show you how to set that piece. take a scrap piece of your lumber material, and when you take a measurement, write it down. The number one waste of time on a job site when you're doing finished carpentry is not writing down your numbers, and I'll tell you why. As soon as you do that, you come over here, oh, you gotta adjust your saw, or the phone rings, somebody calls, somebody walks in the room, asks you a question, you just generally get distracted with whatever. You forget your number. Now you're right back to measuring again. Don't waste your time, always write it down. And then I can keep that whole list going all day long, no big deal. And 37¼ is right here. Now on this tape, it actually tells me, if you're new to measuring, you're gonna wanna get a tape that has these numbers. Now this is a DeWalt tape measure, 25 foot, okay? It actually tells you what inch and what every different measurement is on the tape. It's a bit of a cheat, but if you're new to this and you're not sure and you're communicating with other people, knowing exactly what you're cutting is important. Now, I'm gonna make the mark a little bit bigger than 37¼ Wow. One of those days already. And I'll show you why. First, we're gonna cut the right length. Okay. Now, I'm already longer than I need to be. This is 37�3/8 and a bit. And here's why. I would rather cut this a little bit too long, all right? And then come back here and take another blade, another saw blade thickness off, then try to make it perfect the first time and get this miter here wrong. Because what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut both miters now. Same thing. Set your saw blade, make your first cut, check to see how far you are from the corner, slide it over, and check it again. Make minor adjustments. Here we go. Now, obviously this is taking a minute to walk you through the process, but there is a perfect corner. And the way you check is you look at the end and you see if there's any flat section. And this one has just a little bit. So we're gonna take off another part of a blade. And the way I do that is I slide the trim into the blade, lift the blade, and then I cut. Because when I went into the blade, I pushed the blade a little bit. So when I lift it up, it kind of reset and it cut me just a hair. The other side, we'll cut the other way, get locked on your 45. I can run my pencil off the edge so I have this little black line showing, and then I'm gonna just do this as a bit of a guide. Okay, blade. I already know this piece is gonna be too long. It's gonna be 37�3/8. And it is, because I cut it perfect. So I'm gonna just gonna cut it down. I'm gonna cut it the right length just by setting the blade there, sliding it over. I'm gonna cut a blade length off. Okay, the point of measuring and cutting long on purpose is it's always easier to take a little bit off when you're done in case you make a mistake while you're cutting. So now we're gonna just put it in place and double check to see how it looks, right? Okay, so here we go. That's the right spot. I'm gonna just open this side up just a touch. So it's gonna be fine. Remember, our goal here is glue the joints, nail the joints, and then attach it to the wall to level everything off, and I'll show you that process now. All right, so we're not needing a whole lot of this, right? Boom. Just run a little bit of a bead. There we go. Now, okay. I'm going to shoot a nail through the side of the first trim into the new trim, and that'll bond all that together. And I'm going to put on a slight angle towards the back so the nail doesn't come out through the face. Okay, same over here. There we go, I like that. Okay, now, I have a bit of a curve in this wall. You'll see that? So if I nail that one tight into the stud behind it, it'll be perfect. So I'm going to set the nail right in this groove, not in the flat section. All right, that worked out well. And over here, yeah, same thing. Okay, and then just a couple into the jamb. Boom. Perfect. Now all we got to do is throw a couple at the bottom, make sure everything's nice and tight to the wall. So these are going into the jamb. And we go. And now all we have left is the side of the trim. And if we can close that up, that's great. Now, behind the jamb, there's usually a small space and then there's wood. But you don't want to nail through the face of the wood. So always find this detail, throw your nails there. Okay? That makes it a lot easier to patch up and a lot harder to see after the fact. We'll do that over here as well. Beautiful. That's enough nails for now. Now we're going to go work on the baseboard. All right, so we're going to be measuring all of the baseboard. I like to measure 4, 5, 10, 50 pieces at a time. It doesn't really matter because this system allows you to measure and cut everything first and then assemble it and then install it. But one thing about this wall is we're getting a tile. And so I have to consider the thickness of this tile and the adhesive that goes behind it. So I'm going to take a 1/2 inch off of this measurement so that I can put the tile, let's presume that that's my finished wood, I can actually tile this wall and slide the tile in behind the wood. I know that this tape is a little bit old, but most tape measures come with a measurement on the back of the tape, and that's the measurement from the heel to the front. All right? So when you're measuring, you can actually measure a space this, okay? So that's my measurement. My measurement is actually 6 feet plus the 3 1/4 inches of the tape itself. So it's 6 foot 3 1/4, okay? So in inches, that ends up being 72 plus 3 1/4, 75 1/4, but we're gonna take off a 1/2 inch. So my measurement is 74 3/4, and this is where this gets interesting. I have a system that I developed that I'm gonna let you use, and that's this. Since we're gonna cut everything at 45, assuming the corners are 90s, you have really only 3 marks here. So this is the length of the board, and that represents physically a board. And on this side, it's a straight cut. On this side, it's a straight cut. It could be an outside or an inside corner, and I just make all these marks. So I'm gonna run around the room, take all my measurements, and then mark this template here with whether it's an outside or an inside 45 cut. That's all I need to know. Then I can go to the saw, knock all those pieces off, and then I can glue it all together, nail it all together, and then slide it in place. So I'll show you how this works. So here's how I do this. Take my measuring board, we'll call it that for now, and this first piece has a straight cut, and then an inside miter joint, because the line will be like this. That's an inside line. So I mark inside joint. The next piece on the left side is going to be an inside joint, and over here, it's going to be an outside miter. All right, and after that, the next piece is going to be this, and then that. So now all I do is measure the 3 pieces. Nice and simple. Again, you can measure both directions. You can just go like this, read your tape. Now that says 20 3/4 is tight. 5/8 was actually going to be perfect because when you're measuring into a corner, you want to go a little bit short on purpose. It's easier to finish and fix all this with the caulking after the fact than to try to force it all in place, and then you'll end up cracking your joint on your drywall. So we'll go 20 5/8. Okay. And this one, we're going to take the actual measurement, 35 1/2, because I want a 35 1/2 to be coming out of that corner just a little bit. I'm fine if it comes a little bit past that corner. Again, I'm going to install the trim first, lay it in position, and then we can caulk the gaps. So let's get that measurement one more time, because I broke my own rule and I never wrote it down. 35 1/2. And then this wall, we're going to cut 4 7/8. Just a little bit more would make me feel better. So if you want to get really specific, you can go 4 7/8, and you can actually put L for long. And you can cut in between 4 7/8 and 5 inch. That's what I'm going to do. Let's go to the saw. So we'll start with the first cut. Is the simplest. It's just a straight cut 74 3/4. I'm going to measure that and put a mark right there. Okay. Now, we also have a short one. And whenever I have a short one with inside and outside corners that I'm going to be doing on the flat, I like to cut them first. Because that way I can hold my wood in place far away from where the saw is going to be. So, 20 5/8. Wow, that is not going to be big enough. 4 7/8. Yep. So I've got one that's 4 7/8 here. Long, right? Now, if you were to look at this, remember that's the end of the wall. So this board is actually going to be like that and like that. Something along that line, right? So what we want to do is we want to put this edge on first. It doesn't have to be perfect. We'll set this up. Make sure your trim is against your fence. That holds it square to the blade. Start the blade, and then once the machine is running, then you can make your cut. All right, now, if you want to have nice looking trim and you want to be safe, use a really sharp blade. The duller the blade, the more likely you are to have an accident. Now, we can take our measurement to 4 7/8 long, right here. We'd call that 15/16, but it doesn't actually get written on the tape. That's why I came up with that other way of saying it. All right, now here's the thing. The saw blade only rests on one side. So when you want to cut the other angle, going that way, you actually have to move the trim around. We'll extend that arm. The reason I made the mark about 1.5 inches off the edge here, because on the thick piece of wood, that's where the blade makes contact first. All right? So I can actually hold this board in place, line that up, and like I mentioned before, we'll do a quick cut line to confirm, and then we can make an adjustment if we need to. Yeah, I'm just not quite long enough. There we go. Now, that little bit of a nick there is not going to be an issue. We can take care of that during our touch-up phase, but that is how we set up that double outside corner. Now, that's my first measurement for my other cut. Okay, perfect. Take our notes, scratch off, those cuts are done. Next piece. So now I'm going to do the 20 5/8, okay? Now my material's upside down. So how you visualize this side will be square, and this side will have that inside corner. First thing we have to do is square this off. Don't ever think or assume that because it comes from the supplier or the store, even if it looks nice, that it's square. A lot of times they're running this board fast through the machines, and it gets cut even on a 1 degree angle. It'll wreck your day. So always hold things nice to the fence and clean up your own edge. All right, now we can measure from that. 20 and, oh, hang on, that's an inside corner. Whoops, I got my own self spun around here. When you're measuring an inside corner, you measure the whole width of the board, 20 5/8, right? What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut that off first. We'll put that measurement where the saw blade will make contact. There we go. All right. Okay. So now the board is the right length, but we want to cut this up. So we got two choices. I can guess. I can tilt my saw. I can come over here and I can throw a cut line on it and throw a cut line on it, throw a cut line on it and go crazy. Or we can cheat and come at it from over here. Because I can set the blade off the back of that wood right there. That's my spot. And I can see that. And you'll notice I'm not going to get all the way through because it makes contact. Yeah, makes contact on both sides. Here's a little trick. Since we're holding the material up against the fence, it holds it square. I can cut and trim off the back side. perfect every time. So now we got 35.5. That's our last piece. So let's get this up. Let's visualize 35.5. So we're going to be coming out of the corner on the 45 that way. 35.5 over here. We're also going to be cutting that way. Seems awful tricky, right? Well, what you can do, here's another trick. You can add the thickness of the material, which is 3/4. You can add that to this measurement, all right? Which ends up making it 36.25. And here's why. If we cut this at 36.25, this is actually where the outside of that cut finishes off. And this gives us flexibility. Okay? That's also a cut. All right? You see where I'm going with this? Now I can lay my saw flat, turn this around, and I can cut that from here. And I can line that up right to where my blade is touching the edge. And finish my cut. And then I'm going to switch sides again. You remember I'm cutting this angle, so I'm going to be cutting from here. So what I can do is I can measure over 3/4 of an inch. Remember, when you're cutting on a 45-degree angle, the dimension on this side of the line and this side of the line are exactly the same. So that's just a little bit old grade 5 math that you can employ. So you can make a mark here at 3/4 of an inch, and your saw blade will make that contact first. So what we do is set this back, okay? We're gonna hold that in place. Now what I gotta do is I gotta cheat, because I gotta be able to look underneath, all right? Get this out of my way. I am loving that. And that is how you can make all these cuts in a variety of different ways. The secret is measure it once and cut it twice or 3 times or 4 times or whatever it takes. But you can work back towards your lines. So now I've got my inside corner. So the outside corner is 4 7/8 long, all right? Which basically means 15/16. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna call it 5 short. It's easier, much easier math. And the way you wanna do this on this saw is you add the thickness of the wood times 2. So 3/4 gives you 1.5. So we're actually gonna cut 6.5 short. But we're gonna try to do 6.5 first because it's easy to shim off a little bit, but that gives us a little flexibility. So here we go, right? Because we're doing outside corners, let's start with the easy one. We'll go over here and we'll just cut an edge. Okay, now we can measure back. 6.5, was it? If you're ever not sure, there we go. That's why we always write things down. It makes life so much easier. This cut would come from this side, right? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna have to run a few times here because the measurement is based on the thick part of the dimension. So I'm gonna have to start a couple of saw cuts here and cut right through until I see where it comes in contact with that pencil, and then we'll commit. Okay, now it only takes a couple seconds to do that, but then you get a perfect measurement. There we go. All right, so before you assemble all these pieces, just do a quick check. Make sure that it's all gonna fit, right? That's a little bit tight down here on the bottom. So I'm going to just gonna mark this, cut that one a little shy. Okay, that's a little bit too far off the edge. So the easiest cut for me to make is on this side, so I'm going to scribe here. And you know what? This is the time to do it. If you run a bunch of measurements, go to the saw and cut them, and then come and double check, and if things need a little bit of modification, that's fine. Because we're intentionally marking just a little bit long, so that if we have problems with the saw or the cutting, we can make those adjustments without throwing wood in the garbage. This one is also just it's a little bit long, but not really. I'm gonna leave that one alone. One more trick, before we assemble, is if you're working on a whole room, always start with your long walls. If you do all your long walls first and you make a mistake on the trim, you can use that piece of wood to cut smaller pieces out in the room. If you start with the small intricate ones like I am, and you make mistakes, all you're doing is throwing out wood that has no other value. So remember, start big, work to small, and then when you get to these corners, cut everything first, double check the fit, and then when you get the perfect fitting, then we're going to assemble and install. Boom, boom, and boom. This is where it gets interesting because in this old house, this part of the floor actually caves down a little bit. So you don't want to follow the contour. Now this is old home trimming techniques. If you're in a new place and everything's flat and level, great, good for you. You can just nail it in as you go. But what I want to do is actually connect all these pieces with glue and nails first. And then when I put it in, I'm going to put it tight on the corners, and the bottom in the back here is going to raise up. And it's going to follow a level line so I can have nice joints. And that is going to be the key to my success here. We're just going to slide that glue around a little bit, make a joint. We're going to nail through the side into that other 3/4 inch thick wood. One up here. Beautiful. Okay. Softwood lumber is really predictable. We're also going to do this corner. Same thing. Okay, slide the glue around a little bit. It's basically the same thing. Holding everything nice and tight, fingers out of the way. And visually, this bar, you know what's straight. The nail's going in straight. Line it up so you know it's not going to stick out. Just in case. Now, we've got all three pieces together. Now watch what happens. And put it in the corner. Okay, so you'll see the trim over here, there's a big gap at the bottom, even when it's tight at the top. And that's because that whole piece of trim over on my elbow side is down, and it's causing that to open up. See how that works? So this is how I know that the floor is caving away. So if I lift the other side and close that gap and then nail it, then it's going to be nice and tight, because the biggest enemy you have to installing your trim is contact later on. If the trim isn't nice and snug to the wall, you're going to vacuum or sweep, or the kids are playing around with the ball, things are going to get broken and chipped and knocked out of position. So make sure, there we go, when you nail it, everything stays nice and tight. Try your best to install your nails into the framing behind it. And if you can, put it in the contour, the detail of the work. Now this particular wall is actually full with heat runs, so there's nothing there to attach this to other than the drywall. So I know that if I want to take a risk of puncturing the grill, right, making all that noise, we're going to leave that alone. Over here, I'm going to bring that wood right down to where the casing is. Here we go. That's installed. Now I know there's going to be a lot of people saying, oh, why didn't you leave the gap all the way around for the flooring? It's because the gap is going to be inconsistent. So even if I raise it high enough for the flooring to go underneath, I'm going to have the same problem of a huge gap in some places and not in others. And so the way we handle that is with a small little piece of trim. Now there are a ton of different shoe molds on the market. This one is designed to be added after the flooring goes in. It is a 1/2 inch deep, so there's plenty of room for expansion, contraction gaps, no matter what kind of flooring you're using. So I'm going to do the flooring first. You have this pre-painted, and I'm just going to add some no nails adhesive on the back. I'll stick it in place, and tell me how sexy that looks. It's not quarter round, it's not ugly. So if you go to these specialty stores, you can get quarter round or shoe mold trims like this that match the design profile, and it looks amazing when it's all finished. That gives you all the flexibility you need in older homes to be able to finish after the flooring, and it's a quick little step to run around the room. So once all your trim is installed, then we pull out the caulking gun, because we want to finish our job nice, and we just want to get a little bit of a cut on an angle, You can see there is not a lot of room for that caulking to come out. That is perfect. I like it like that because I don't want to use too much, then I don't have to wipe it all away. And you'll see that bead that I'm throwing there. It's a perfect gap between the trim and the wall. Okay. Whenever you think you got too much excess, you can just rub it in further down the line here. Sometimes these gaps are a little tricky to work with. It's kind of like drywall work, right? Always. There we go. Finish the other direction from a corner so you don't have any of those ridges. All right, we're going to go around, we're going to caulk all of the gaps. Sweet. Remember, resist the temptation to use this caulking to fill the little holes because this will shrink a little bit when it dries, and then when the light hits it the right way, everybody's going to see the little dents. It's going to look like junk. So now our inside and outside miters are glued and nailed. We still finish off with the tiniest bead of the caulking. Okay. Making sure not to leave any extra on the wood so that when you go to paint, you aren't going to have nasty little ridges. Now, this is why I mentioned when you do everything with a 45-degree angle, it's not always perfect. But you can finish perfect, okay? You just run this finger up like this, in the direction you're heading. Don't forget to caulk around the doors to the wall. And in your miter joints on the face. These things are all nailed and glued together, but don't want to rely on the paint to fill all those gaps and cracks in. Okay? As well, always do the gap of the door casing to the door jamb. That'll soften up that edge, get rid of that shadow, and then it'll paint in perfectly. If you don't use enough the first time, and you see a crack, go back and fix it. Don't ever leave a job that you're not happy with. There we go. Nice. Once you're done all your caulking, it's time to fill your nail holes so that the caulking has time to set. Now this is a 2-hour dryer like I mentioned, so put this away and let's get on to the other putty. Okay, so this is when you're going to want your 4-inch knife. And we don't have to make a lot of putty, so just make a little bit of a circle here. Hopefully get enough material here that'll hold a little bit of water. Now this is a 45-minute compound, so it does take a few minutes to set up. And when mixed with cold water, it gives you a little bit longer working time. And so what happens is the water starts to work its way through the mud and slowly will penetrate. But you can speed the process up just by sprinkling it from the outside edges. Okay. This takes a little bit of practice. So if you're new to this and you try to do this, I would suggest doing it in a place where if your volcano collapsed and it ran off all 4 corners at the same time, it's not going to be in a place where you're going to make a mess you're going to regret. Now, I'm a little shy on powder here, it feels like. All right, there we go. That's just too loose. We are trying to make this more of a putty. It's kind of like almost like baking class here, you know? Just keep on putting a little bit more of that on there. There we go. Okay. Now, we don't want it lumpy. We want it nice and smooth. So you want to work it up a little bit using the side of the knife. Okay. Now we're good. Now there's two holes you have to fill. Remember, we have the holes on the flat section and we have the holes on the detail. Okay, so I'm going to just wipe a little bit on my finger and I'm going to just press that into the hole. Okay, a little goes a long way. So the more you put on your finger, the more you're going to be wiping off when, after you're done filling the hole. And for those other details on those flat sections, don't trust your finger because your finger's are round that it'll pull some of the material out. Just use your 4-inch knife. Done. That's easy. Now this stuff doesn't shrink when it dries, so after it's dry, you can take your sanding sponge, give it a quick run, you're ready for paint. I would suggest maybe watching this video next. We're going to be doing some sill work and some crown molding, and we're going to give you all the tools that you need to be successful.